Hello, it is Monday, which means it is time for the Hammerhead Show. I am Jack Hammer of the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, and with me, as always, and partly why we call this the Hammerhead Show, is Rob Shuve and his Sneakerheads. How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing very well, Jack. Every time that intro video gets me, I like that. It's so solid to have that throw from past greats to current greats.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. Jesse put that together really nice for me. I wasn't expecting him to do that when we were talking. I just wanted a video of a couple of specific players, and then he put it together like that, and I was like blown away. So
yeah, that was a win. That was an unintentional win.
Absolutely. That's when you give people thoughts, and then they kind of run with it. And he did a really good job there. And then the same thing, like, I don't know if you've noticed on my banner of my page now on YouTube, the look, it's got the 5 Lombardi trophies, and it's got Joe Montana and Trey Lance, Debo Samuel, Jerry Rice, Dwight Clark, and all like I said, the 5 Lombardis. That was from Swan Song. He just kind of put that together on his own, and
nice,
fantastic stuff. And real quick before we get into the show, I'm actually working on. I set up on this channel. Finally set up the membership page. That's something that I've been needing to look into for a while. So I finally got that set up, and so that's up and running. So if you're checking it out, go ahead and look at that and see about becoming a member of the Jack Hammer channel. That'd be fantastic. And I'm actually working with somebody to maybe put together some fun shirts for those of you that decide that you're going to take the leap into the top membership tier.
Nice.
So we'll see how that works out.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. So I haven't really streamed since I did a quick stream on Thursday afternoon with, to talk about the Alex Mack retirement, but I haven't had a chance to speak with anybody else. And real quick before we get into that, let's just jump over here. There's a couple of people over here want to say hi. Do that are in the comment section. Raphael 5629 says, "What's up, Jack, Rob, and everyone? Good to have you on board." Moonman says, "The shoe and hammer. Let's go, guys." And let's go. And then super chat off the bat. William Bennett, thank you for that. He says, "Hey guys, appreciate you both." Thank you very much, William. Appreciate you being on here with us. But as I was saying, I didn't get a chance to really chat with anybody else about the retirement of Alex Mack. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the 13-year vet deciding to hang it up on Thursday.
Yeah, this was an interesting one for me. I definitely misinterpreted the clues that were out there. Kyle Shanahan coming out to say, "Yeah, we've known for a while what direction this is going to go, and you guys probably do as well." To which I was like, "Yeah, I got you, coach. He's going to be back. He's going to be back, no problem." And then when he retired, I felt pretty foolish in that regard, right? Definitely got it wrong. Have spent a few days on my channel admitting as such that anyone I misled in that direction, I profusely apologize to. If I got your expectations up on Mack returning and then you got the news and it brought you down, I apologize. But I should have known what I came to after the fact, hindsight always being 2020. When the 49ers really began to play up Jake Brendel, that's when I should have clued into the fact that Alex Mack was not going to be back. There was no other reason to begin playing up Jake Brendel in the way that they did, using his name repeatedly, talking about him as an option in case Mack decided not to come back. Admittedly, I was very further confused by George Kittle's response right towards the end, where he was basically pleading towards Mack. I took that as, like, if you're going to be lighthearted and jovial about this situation, then it's got to be trending towards the positive. Now that we know for sure, now that Mack isn't going to be back, I guess what I'm left with is bigger question marks around what seems to me to be a lack of preparation for moving forward without Alex Mack. I don't get a true sense that the 49ers did a whole lot to shore up that position, so they must feel really good about the in-house candidates.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the misreading the situation. I definitely misread it a little bit just because it took so long. I thought we would have had this word would have come out around the draft time, and then the fact that didn't, and then the 49ers didn't make a move at the draft, like to your point of them not making any moves to kind of shore up that position. I was one of the ones I was out there saying I think it's all pointing to him coming back, and if the comment from Kyle Shanahan that you just mentioned, which was just last week, I think it was during the first week of OTAs,
right,
2 weeks ago, when he said, I think you guys know. That should have been that one. And when I heard that, it kind of clued me in that maybe I'm wrong. But then at the same time, maybe I'm not. Who knows, right? I kind of started to lean towards the fact that I was wrong at that point. But and they haven't made any big moves to bolster that position. You talked about the in-house candidates, and you mentioned also how much they talked up Jake Brendel after the draft. So that kind of that leads me to ask you the question: at what point now do you think, or what direction do you think they are going to take that center position moving forward?
I thought that there would at least be some kicking the tires of a candidate like JC Tretter. I mean, that was early on when I thought there was a legitimate chance of Mack retiring, before I completely landed on the wrong answer, where I was like, no, they're bringing Mack back. No problem there. I really thought JC Tretter would be the first one on the phone as soon as that announcement became official. And the fact that he was still out there lingering led me to believe, well, if Mack's not going to be back, they at least have that fallback plan. And, admittedly, I really like the idea of a veteran center paired alongside Trey Lance. The balance that creates. When you have a heady, older quarterback, you can go invest in that young center to cover, for him for the foreseeable future. But if you have that young quarterback, you really want the veteran at the line to help out with the calls, to tell the quarterback what they're seeing, and to call out the assignments. I just don't know with JC Tretter and the inability to practice on a regular basis, that would seem like a pretty big hindrance to bringing him in and pairing him with Trey Lance. I know he hasn't missed many, if any, games over the last 4 years when he was with Cleveland, but that seems like cause for concern. So I look at the in-house candidates. It seems while there's no one else there taking those snaps, might as well take a look at them. And then you always have JC Tretter out there available until someone does sign him.
Yeah, and that's exactly it with Tretter. This is the guy who's only missed. I've been saying that he didn't miss any, but that's because I forgot that last year was a 17-game schedule. He's only missed one game over his tenure with the Browns. Last season, I don't think he practiced at all with them. I think he was just it was in the games. I think he was dealing with, he's definitely dealing with some knee injuries, and the knee injuries go all the way back to his time in Green Bay. He missed time then as well. That's kind of where they started, I think. And this is the guy who, as you mentioned, he plays at a really high level. He's, I think, in over 1,000 snaps last year, he only gave up 1 sack. So Tretter's definitely a strong candidate. The only concern that I think that is out there is the knee issue. And if you're going to be bringing in JC Tretter, is it going to become a situation that's closer to like a D4 type of thing where you spend a bunch of money to bring him in and then he can't play? I think that's the concern.
That's the question, because D4, the year prior to coming to the Niners, played a record number of snaps in his career, right? So if you were basing that fact, if you were basing his health off of that fact, you would say to yourself, no, he's a lock. He comes in, no problem. But when dealing with degenerative issues like the back or knee issues, for example, you do have to be wary of that, because what was done in the past may not necessarily be true going forward, that it is degenerative. It could get worse. Perhaps he wasn't able to practice, but only missed 1 game last year. Maybe that translates to not being able to practice and missing 5 or 6 games this year. So for a team that historically has dealt with these injury issues, even though last year they seem to have climbed out of that hole, it still feels like something the Niners have to be cognizant of.
Yeah, and I think if they do decide to bring in Brendel, and they can, or not Brendel, excuse me, I've got Jake Brendel on my mind, kind of like John Lynch did after the draft. If they do decide to bring in Tretter, that's a position, that's a move, I should say. That would be more along the lines of maybe like what they're doing with Jason Verrett, right? Where you have a solid amount of depth that you feel that you could go forward with, but you try to find somebody else that's can play at a higher level when healthy, and you let that. And if that guy plays all 17 games, fantastic. But if you have to lose him for a game here or there, you have somebody that's capable of stepping in and filling the void. So if they can bring in Tretter on a small deal, $4 or $5 million a year, if that's what he's willing to play for, I would do it. If it's more than that, I think you start to step away from that move.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And again, you do have some time in front of you, right? No sense in bringing in a vet with knee issues that can't practice at this point in time. I'm sure the 49ers have had conversations with him if he's on their list of candidates they would consider. Get those reps to guys where it creates value. I mean, even if Jake Brendel isn't going to be your starter, he's probably going to be your top backup, and therefore every snap that he gets in these mini camps, in the OTAs, is going to be valuable if he's backing up someone like JC Treader, who could miss some time, or if he's going to be the starter going forward, proving that he's a viable center in these OTAs, in the mini camps as we start the preseason, is going to be very valuable.
Yeah, and you have Brendel as one piece, and that's he's solid, and but I think also you also have to factor in Daniel Brunskill there too.
Yeah.
He started 8 games, and
he did.
So that's something that you can't pass up. So really quick, what do you think the 49ers offensive line is going to look like in totality now that we know, because we've gone over this a few different times, but Alex Mack was always kind of factored into that. So now that Mack is not going to be with the 49ers in 2022, how do you see the offensive line shaking out?
When I look at it first crack, I say that the best way to go about it is to minimize the number of changes, right? Offensive line, all about cohesion. How does the line work together as one unit? You finally were able to give Daniel Brunskill a full year at right guard last season. I know that fans like to pick on that as one of the weak spots within the offensive line. I don't necessarily find myself within that camp. I think of Daniel Brunskill as a capable interior guard. I'm not going to go so far as to say top tier, but capable within the NFL is not easy to find along the offensive line. So I believe keeping him at that right guard spot would be beneficial for this team. Not trying to get him into a new position. You're talking up Jake Brendel as an organization, so let's see what he actually has stepping into that role. I would go ahead, leave Brunskill at the right guard position, slide in Brendel to the center spot, have him take the reps throughout the preseason, and then it seems that we're trending towards a position where Aaron Banks is going to be the guy that gets the first crack at left guard, and then right tackle is in hinge depending upon McGlinchey's health as he comes back. But certainly you have a couple of options there. Last year's presumptive swing tackle until he got hurt, Justin School, back this year. Jalen Moore certainly could be out there. And then McKivitz seems like a candidate at right tackle after he performed well at left tackle in week 18 last year.
Yep. And so, yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think you look at it and you have Williams and Banks. I think you're pretty set on that side. You know what your left side, I think, is going to be, at least your starters. And then from the rest of it is where you get the question marks. If McGlinchey's healthy, he's going to be the right tackle, but he's got to be healthy. And it's going to be interesting to see, because I really am high on the rookies that they've brought in along the offensive line, especially Spencer Burford. This is a guy who I think could really fit in well on the right side, and if they want to let him really compete with it, and that's why, I hear what you're saying with Brendel and Brunskill being there, because you can let Brunskill just continue to develop at that right guard spot instead of having to switch him now to another starting different place in the center and working it that way. I have a feeling that some of that's going to depend on what happens with Jalen Moore and Spencer Burford. If those two can come in and are able to push Brunskill, especially Burford, because this guy's strong, he's big, and he can move, and they've kind of been working with him in that area. I could see a situation where you go Williams, Banks, Brunskill, Burford, and McGlinchey kind of a thing, or maybe more with Burford backing him up to start the year off. But more likely than not, at least the way that it looks right now, Brendel and Brunskill are going to be in the middle with McGlinchey on the outside. Just kind of when you look through it, they just have so many different pieces that they can move around. And so that's what's going to make it an interesting battle to watch throughout training camp, I think.
It's simultaneously what makes me feel a bit more secure about the offensive line and makes me very uneasy, is that we have so many pieces where you're like, oh, I could move around these puzzle pieces to fit him here, slide him over one position. It gives me some solace that there will be a floor that I'm comfortable with. The question that needs to be answered in my mind is just how high is the ceiling, right? How good is the best 5 pairing along that offensive line? Because I do overlook Spencer Burford as an option to come in, but quite honestly, even though it's an end of the 4th round pick, it's still a 4th round interior offensive lineman pick, which is still in the meat of those selections, right? I mean, offensive line, the interior offensive line is typically not going high in drafts. And so you're still looking at a talented individual being taken there at the end of the 4th, especially when you have someone with the athleticism that Burford does.
Yeah. And I think as we start to look back on this draft, I think when we get to year 2 and 3 of the 2022 draft, like a guy like Burford, who was taken in round 4, maybe even Samuel Womack, who was taken in round 5, you're going to see some really I think there's some really good talent that are from those 2 players in particular. I've been really impressed with what I've seen in Burford so far. So I'm excited to see what happens when they put the pads on and if he's able to continue that progression and show up, because he looks like a veteran in terms of his strength and movement ability. So we'll see how it works out.
Interesting observation on the center position specifically. I noticed when Matt Barrows was putting out, candidates for taking reps at the center position versus games started, he left Brunskill off of that list, right? I mean, it was meant to highlight how few games each one of those players has started. I think the most of any of the other candidates is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 starts, but Brunskill, as you pointed out earlier, had 8 in this offense. And so it does seem like something you have to consider as a potential replacement there at center.
Yeah. And it's all depends on how, I think that really depends on how well Moore and Burford are looking. If they're looking strong and they look like they can hold it down, then you might have a little bit more of a competition at the center spot. So it's really both of those spots I think are interchangeable, not interchangeable, but they're kind of working together in terms of, if this guy doesn't, if these other 2 guys look really good, you might be able to move the other guy inside. Or
that's a great point, that the competition at the 2 spots is very interdependent upon what the other one is doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's good to have 3 or 4 guys that can really fill that role, those roles. So we'll see how it plays out. It's definitely something to keep an eye on as we go into minicamp starting tomorrow and then training camp in July.
Most definitely.
Yeah. And really quick before we move along, have a bunch more folks who are yelling at us in here. We got JC says, "What's up, Jack?" and 100K Shoe. He's telling us to make sure that we like the video, everybody. So if you could like the video, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and hit that little bell so you get notified when we go live. That'd be fantastic. Let's see what else we've got. We got a bunch of stuff going on over here. We got Bay Area Baller jumping in. He says, "What's up, gentlemen?"
Bay Area.
Yep. Good to have you in. And then JC says for him, he wants to upgrade the current room, downgrade from Mack. In his opinion, I think he's talking about overall. And Bay Area Baller says, "I bet Brunskill would be way more prepared to play center after watching Mack firsthand and learning the nuances."
That seems like a fair assumption.
Yeah, that's a fair assumption. I think he had been watching. Who was it? Who before that? Who was it that got injured in 2019? Weston Richburg.
Yeah, so Weston Richburg, and then he got to follow up Honus Grasu. Was that his? What was?
Yeah, you had Ronus Grasu and Ben Garland were the other.
Yeah, right.
Were the other 2 centers in 2020.
Some key guys to learn from.
Absolutely. Really quick, William Bennett jumps in again, says, "Hit that like button." Again, we got a few folks want to make sure you guys hit that like button. So don't let them down.
That's right. That's right.
Don't let them down. And then, not on top of the Alex Mack retirement, we had one more retirement that came up, and that was everybody's favorite running back, Frank Gore, deciding to hang him up. And it was kind of known, I think, that he was going to be retiring this year, but he signed the 1-day contract with the 49ers and did it without a whole bunch of pomp and circumstance like you usually see around these deals. But Frank Gore going out as a 49er, and just kind of want to get your thoughts, Rob, on Gore as a 49er, and then we'll get into his Hall of Fame candidacy in a minute.
I don't give Jed York props very often. I'll be honest, I don't think he earns props all that often. But I got to give him props on this one. Those photographs of Jed York smiling, grinning ear to ear when he's there with Frank Gore, like that was my inner child there with him, grinning, smiling from ear to ear, just as Jed was. I thought it was a very genuine moment. I think Jed has expressed the sentiment of wanting to bring Frank back for the one-day ceremony. No questions asked, that he was going to immediately be placed in the Ring of Honor. And I just feel that we bag on Jed enough that we have to also recognize when he does some things that we agree with. This, for me, is one that I felt he treated it with the level of pomp and circumstance that it required, because Frank is this generation's Joe Montana, if you will. I mean, I can't think of a player who was more important to this organization in the 2000s than Frank Gore. And he just embodied what it meant to suffer through some of those years in the mid 2000s and to do it with pride and to do it the right way and to, be a football player. So to me, it was overdue, because Frank just kept on playing. And yet it was a very special day. It allowed me to say a few words, which I felt were completely inadequate on my part, to express the way in which I feel about Frank Gore. I only have 2 framed jerseys in this office. The one that you can see on camera, Joe Montana, the one that you can't see, Frank Gore. And so that's the level of appreciation that I have for him, and will always think of him as one of the greatest football players, just a true through and through football player.
Yeah, and the thing about Gore is when the 49ers drafted him in 2005,
right.
he just had such an incredible year. There were a number of his years were on teams that weren't very good, where he put up some of his best numbers, but he just did it all the time. He is a guy who I think it was mentioned, after he had announced the retirement, it came out where he says, he's always going to refer to the 49ers as we.
Yes.
And I think it was Joe Staley mentioned how, he would call, even when he was playing in Indianapolis, he would still be upset about the 49ers losing games. And so I think those are some of the other things too that really endear Frank Gore to 49er fans. And he was just such a good running back. And he was just a guy that ran through people, and his ability to get through the tiniest cracks in the line of scrimmage, I think, is one of the craziest things. I wouldn't say craziest. One of the best things that made him such a strong running back in the NFL, why he lasted so long.
I agree wholeheartedly. That, and there are some amazing images out there that highlight Frank's ability to run nearly parallel to the freaking ground. I mean, you'll see some where Frank's body is just at an angle that doesn't seem like it jives with physics, right? I mean, he just was able to get a certain angle, to get through slim windows, to pick up 4 yards when it looked like the line had only blocked for 1. I mean, it was that heart that seemed to come through on a regular basis in the way in which Frank played. As you mentioned, oftentimes early on in his career for bad teams, where you would think a player would struggle to generate the type of motivation needed to fight for those extra yards. Frank never struggled. Frank was consistent.
Yeah, no, and that's what made him what he was, right? It was that consistency. You go back and let's just get into it. The Hall of Fame potential. Is he going to make a first ballot Hall of Famer or not in your mind? And I think a lot of times when you get into that question, people look at it and they're like, well, he was never an All-Pro. He was never, I don't know if he ever won a rushing title in his career. I don't think he was ever the rushing leader in the NFL in any of those seasons, but it was just the consistency and his ability to put those numbers up regularly that really made the difference for him and put him, number 3 overall in the history of the NFL as a running back.
Yeah, I think he came real close the year that LaDainian Tomlinson had that MVP season, right? I think that was where there was some alignment in Frank accumulating significant yards. I think that the biggest yardage gain in his career. And, I get that argument. I understand it. And I think when you go back, in particular, if you look at the running back position, there are so many flash in the pan type of performances where you have one significant year and then considerable drop off, right? Or a couple of good years, but unable to sustain that. So to then turn around and use Frank's consistency, Frank's ability to perform over a decade and a half against him seems crazy to me. Absolutely crazy. If you go back and look at some of those players that only accrued a couple of impressive seasons and then compare their totals against Frank's, they pale in comparison. And to me, it's not something that goes against Frank for his vying into being in the Hall of Fame, that ability to do it year after year. He set the NFL record for most consecutive seasons with 1,200 plus yards from scrimmage. NFL record, 12 seasons in a row with 1,200 yards or more from scrimmage. That, to me, that type of consistency within a physical game like the NFL has to be recognized for just how special it is. The ability to do it year in and year out is something to be praised, and not something, in my opinion, that takes away from his eligibility for the Hall of Fame, in particular as a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key there, is that it shouldn't take away that consistency, especially at that position, to be able to do it year after year. I think he was a 49er through 2014. That's 10 seasons. 2005 to 2014. That's 10 seasons as a 49er. And he was still putting up big numbers in 2013. I know he might have dripped a little bit in 2014, but he was putting up big numbers all the way through. And he definitely, in my opinion, Frank Gore deserves to be a first ballot NFL Hall of Famer. And so we'll see how that all plays out in 5 years, but he should definitely be going into Canton.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind. And the way in which the NFL celebrated Frank Gore and the way in which players, current and past, responded to the NFL's celebration of Frank Gore, I truly believe he will be a first ballot Hall of Famer. The NFL, from a marketing standpoint, when you consider it that way, to have a top 5 record holder in a category such as lifetime rushing yards not make it into the NFL would almost be a black mark for the NFL to not have that individual make it in as a first ballot Hall of Famer. It would almost lessen the impressive nature of that list, of that statistic. When you are behind only Walter Payton and Emmitt frickin' Smith in any category, I don't care what it is, that's pretty special. It's one of my favorite lines. If you want to know just how special a list is, tell me who else is on that list. When you tell me the other people on that list are Walter Payton and frickin' Emmitt Smith, yeah, that's a pretty impressive list.
Yeah, it makes it pretty tough to knock him down once you look at it that way. Because at least for me, I always looked at Walter Payton as the gold standard. He set the record. I remember watching him break the record back the season that he did that. And so for me, Walter Payton, sweetness, that he was always been the top guy. But for Frank Gore to even be close to him, I think if he just played a couple more years, he might have been able to break that record, pass him up, and he maybe even catch up to Emmitt Smith if he just kind of hung on and stuck around with another team for a year or two. But definitely, Frank Gore goes into the Hall of Fame, and what's it going to be, 2027?
I will be championing that cause. I will absolutely be spearheading that one. Frank deserves it. And let's, set the statistics aside for a moment. Those intangibles, Frank was a phenomenal pass blocker. And that's something that gets overlooked at the running back position by everyone except for head coaches, offensive linemen, quarterbacks, the people who understand just how important that asset is. Frank Gore was not afraid to stick his head in there.
Yeah, no, he was a all-around running back, not just the yards, but everything else that he did as well. So he definitely deserves the high praise that everybody was giving him last week, and what's going to continue to come his way as this plays out and he gets closer to Canton. It's going to be something to definitely keep an eye on. And as 49er fans, it should be fun for all of you to be seeing one of your greats be mentioned in those terms. The kind of moving off of the Hall of Fame, moving off of the retirements now, the 49ers pulled a little bit of an end around on us today. We found out that minicamp, which was originally scheduled to take place next week, this week was supposed to be the third and final week of OTAs, has been bumped up, and they actually going to be starting tomorrow. So I wanted to get your thoughts, Rob, as we go through this before, just to kind of see what I want to know is what are the things that you're going to be looking for at OTAs? And if you're over in the comment section, folks, you can throw some things out at me as well. What are some of the reports that you want to hear back on? What are the things that are of most interest to you?
Yeah, I'll be very interested to read in the comments as well what people are feeling that they want updates on. I also just want to comment on the idea that it's intriguing to me. Last year, it felt as though we went through OTAs. In the last week of OTAs, you can correct me if I'm misremembering any of this, but it was in that last week of OTAs where we had the couple of injuries that happened on the same day, right? I believe it was Justin School and Tavarius Moore. And then shortly after that, we got that announcement that mandatory minicamp was canceled last year. We did not have mandatory minicamp, but we did have our third week of OTAs. This year, they surprised us by canceling the OTAs that were supposed to happen this week and moving up that mandatory minicamp to fill in instead. But it's not in response to any injuries, which is what I'm pleased about. Do you view this as potentially, if we're reading tea leaves here, Jack, and admit that we are fully reading tea leaves in here? We can't ask Kyle Shanahan until we get there, till we get his next media availability. Is it a good sign that the 49ers are canceling the last few days of OTAs and moving up the mandatory minicamp? In that, I mean, purely from a standpoint of Lance's readiness, right? You could argue if he looked like he wasn't ready, as some of these national reports have hinted at or blatantly stated, you would think you'd maximize the number of practices, even if they were light walkthrough practices, because they would be mental reps for the young quarterback. The idea that we canceled 3 practices and moved up to minicamp, are you reading anything positive into it, Jack?
No. I don't read that as a positive. I mean, I don't think it's a negative. It's not a big negative, but I will say what my read on is that it makes me want to ask, or makes me wonder if there was some reason, because remember last year, the reason they canceled the last couple of practices was because they were going to get shut down anyway by the NFL.
Right. There was some discipline coming, right? For the contact.
Yeah. Because of the contact with the one video that got out and so on. So I'm just wondering if there was some reasoning behind from the NFL level that's causing them to give up 3 practices, because even though Trey Lance, to my eye, has looked very good through the first 6 days of the OTA period, I would still want to get him every single rep as possible. And the same thing with the rookies. I'd want to see them getting every rep possible if you could. So, I think that's a question that needs to be asked tomorrow: is what went into the decision to move up the OTAs by a week?
Yes. Are there any looming practice infractions from the NFL coming down in the near future that will help to explain the loss of these 3 practices? Yeah.
So that's my own thing. So I don't take it as a big negative. I don't. Yeah. In terms of, I don't think it has to do with Trey Lance being ready per se. I just think it has to do with, if we're going to look at something positive, the biggest positive that's coming out of this so far, knock on wood, is that the 49ers have not sustained anything like what we saw today in Jacksonville.
Right. CJ Beathard, that's a shame.
Yeah. See, I'm not even saying it. Well, there's actually 2. Beathard was one, and there was another player as well. So they actually had two of those today in Jacksonville. So, so we'll see what happens. That's the biggest thing for me, is if the 49ers can come out of minicamp and go into training camp fully healthy, that's the positive.
Right.
That I would take away.
Goal number one, Niners. All right. So, I mean, if I'm getting into things that I'll be looking for in these mini camps, I have to say that the first thing that I'm going to want to know is who showed up, right? which players are not actually going to be there. The names that I'm specifically keeping my eye on for in attendance / practicing would be Deebo Samuel, someone that if he's there, I don't necessarily expect him to actually set foot on the field, that there would be some, reason why he wasn't practicing to avoid any fines. Nick Bosa, another one. I'll be interested to see if he's there and practicing. Trent Williams. All 3 of those guys I wouldn't expect to be practicing, but it'd be nice to see them there just for that camaraderie. Another intriguing one for me, just because it hasn't officially been filed yet, and we're now past June 1, is just Dee Ford. Like, just out of curiosity. I think he's retiring. I think that's over. I trust John Lynch in him saying that, but again, we're past June 1st and they haven't filed that paperwork yet. So out of the corner of my eye, I'm just keeping an eye out for Dee Ford.
Yeah. I don't think we'll see D Ford on the
No.
field, but yeah, no, that's a good one. Who's going to be there? Um, and I would agree with you that there's a chance. I think Trent Williams, we already heard. I think somebody reported that Trent Williams is going to be at practice. We'll see if he actually is on the field or not participating.
And he and Debo, I think, were at the finals game last night. Is that correct? That the two of them were seen together at that one. So there's a chance that both are there.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I didn't get a chance to see that. I was watching the game and not on Twitter. I missed some of the news last night around that. I did see that Coach Shanahan was there and was sitting behind the Warriors bench, so that's a good thing, right? At least it shows how those folks differ from us. That's all I have to say on that part. No, but they're big time. You can tell he's been to a number of Warrior games this year. Shanahan has, and obviously Debo Samuel as well. He's been following them around with their playoff run. So
yeah,
it's always fun to watch the local teams support the other teams. It's always kind of the other sports. It's always fun to do.
It is. It's cool to see people that you're a fan of being a fan of someone else, right? There's something sort of magical about that, where it allows you to then put yourself in their shoes because you can relate to being a fan. After all, you are a fan of that individual. When I see a 49er that's, diehard behind the Sharks, when all the offensive linemen were getting behind the San Jose Sharks back in the day, that fired me up. They had like the custom track suits and stuff like that, or sweatshirts, whatever it was they had going on for the Sharks. That fires me up because, again, it shows the human side to these athletes and allows me to feel in some way even more connected with them.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes it seem like it brings them down, makes them more real, right? Like they're just like a regular guy like everybody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Some of the other things I'm looking at, there are definitely positional battles that I have my eyes on. On the defensive side of the ball, specifically speaking about the safety spot, definitely want to know if Hufanga is the clear guy to beat at that position. It seemed that way coming out of the organized team activities. Is that the same throughout minicamp? The nickel corner, same question, right? Darquez Denard, I did not have my eye on him as a potential starting candidate for the nickel spot, but as you're saying, looks good out there so far, seems to be getting the lion's share of the first team reps at the position. Does that continue throughout the minicamps? And then one that hadn't held much intrigue for me, but with the news of the 2 surgeries that Azeez Al-Shire went through and therefore, still recovering, making his way back, who ends up as that third linebacker after Dre comes in? Simply because if you have an injury throughout the year, that's going to be someone that gets leaned on in a lesser role, admittedly, but still an important one. And if the 49ers turn around and do deal Dre Greenlaw, which I suspect is at least a possibility if some team comes knocking with, say, a 5th round pick in next year's draft, I think the 49ers would be willing to sacrifice some depth in order to bring in a compensatory piece like that. So the third linebacker spot seems like one that could become a bigger key than it is right now.
Yeah, and I don't know if it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that. You mentioned earlier, who's there, who's not. And so when you get into that third linebacker spot, that's a position where it'll be interesting to see who's there and who isn't. Because right now, just off the top of my head, if we were to list it, I would say, Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, and then with Azeez Al-Shire not there dealing with his injuries, if he's not able to practice, that would mean that it's Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles that would step into that role.
Right.
But Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles has been out with an injury of his own. So will he be able to be at practice and participating? Because we haven't seen him yet throughout during the OTAs, he wasn't on the field. So will he be able to be out there tomorrow? And if not, then that leads you into Oren Burks territory and that kind of thing.
Which would be exciting from its own right, because the head of the Oren Burks fan club is East Bay Chris. And therefore, if Oren Burks is getting first team reps, East Bay Chris is going to be on one, and I'm always here for that.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, I mentioned in one of my, 49ers According to Jax last week that Oren Burks is the new Market Nizacha of the 49ers. He's kind of filling that same role. And I was a little disappointed. And, East Bay Chris is a big time 49er fan. So I was a little disappointed to find out that he was not aware of who Mark Nizacha was.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that kind of was kind of a letdown a little bit. And then he said, but he did say though is that if that's the case, then he expects that Warren Burks must be the greatest linebacker ever because that's or excuse me, Mark Nazacha must be because that's who he is.
That's who Oren is at this point. It makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a logical connection. EBC.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see how that goes. I think the one other thing that I'm looking for. I really like what you said there with the safety and the nickel. Those are definitely positions I'll be keeping an eye on. I didn't really even have linebacker so much on my list just because we know those top two. I don't think Dre Greenlaw is moving anywhere, not this year.
Right.
But
I would have guessed they would have done that during the draft.
Yeah, you would think so. The one that I'm looking forward to also is I'm looking forward to kind of see what Danny Gray looks like. He had a really strong first impression at the rookie minicamp. He didn't really see a whole lot out of him during the first week of the OTAs with the veterans there. And then he didn't participate last week. So I want to see what Danny Gray looks like out there with all the veterans and see if he can maybe show up a little bit more than he has to this point.
Yeah, that would be very encouraging. It definitely is something that I've got my eye on as far as the wide receiver room, but a little more specific for me in that regard. But I'll be looking forward to any Danny Gray updates. Along the offense, the entire offensive line, Jack, like the more information you get me about these guys on the offensive line, the better I will sleep at night. I've found myself the last week or so oddly waking up at like 4:30 in the morning, just like wake up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, like having to go back to sleep. And I think it's offensive line woes that are on my mind. I think it's Mack retirement has got me not sleeping well, Jack. So we're going to test this hypothesis. The more information we get about the offensive line and who's platooning in versus platooning out, who's holding down center, who's at right guard, the more information, the better there. And then tight end 2 is one that'll be fascinating to me. Do the Niners go more of the, lead blocking tight end where it seemed like Charlie Warner got significantly more reps towards the end of last season? Or does Ross Dwelly, sort of emerge in the way that many of the descriptors of his ability to catch balls in practice finally translate onto the live field during the season? That one is one I'm keeping my eye on. And then obviously everything Trey Lance related. It is just, I want the positive storylines about Trey Lance. I want to hear those things that refute the national reports that come out, those national reports that come out without significant evidence behind them. I want the real evidence so that we can point to it and say, there it is. Look at it with your own 2 eyes.
Yeah, the Trey Lance angle here is just so frustrating. I shouldn't even say frustrating. It's just so funny to listen to because you have all the people who aren't around the team really being negative, and then you have the people that are actually there watching everything are like positive, and that goes throughout. That's the reporters and also the team itself, right? You go back to, I wrote the article for the Press Democrat today. Just since December, there's been a number of defensive people in particular who have come out and spoke highly of Trey Lance, and Kyle Shanahan kind of set that up late in December. He said, go talk to those guys and they'll tell you how well he's playing in practice and so on. And so I went back and I looked at the quotes that they were giving us back in December. And then even so far at the beginning of OTAs, and, they match up with what I've seen through the first 2 practices that we've been out there. Trey Lance looks every bit the top quarterback on the field. And I don't see much of a drop off, or if at any, from him, from where Jimmy Garoppolo was to where Trey Lance is now. I just don't see it.
And I think people, myself included, eat up everything about Lance. Like, what is the dynamic between he and Brian Griese, sort of the unknown quantity coming in as our new quarterbacks coach? How's the accuracy looking? Does he have favorite targets from one practice to the next? How's his on-field attitude, his presence, right? How's that aura? You can't get a true sense of that in a video, I feel, the same way that you can there in person, because you can see the way in which others around him react to that energy. And so I will be all ears when you are giving your breakdowns of those practices, specifically as it relates to Trey Lance. And I will be keying in when he's at the pressers. Those are, gold, because it gives us all the opportunity to observe him, read and react in between the questions that are coming at him, and the way in which he's able to present himself in a confident and assured manner.
Yeah, and it's going to be, it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, because at least for me, the first time we saw Trey Lance come to the podium in this offseason during OTAs, he was a different guy, right? He was much more jovial, much more calm, and his demeanor in front of the press that first day was very much Jimmy Garoppolo like. Not saying that he is, Jimmy Garoppolo, but what I'm saying is, when Jimmy Garoppolo stepped up, you knew that he was the guy, right? And just the way that he carried himself in front of the media kind of there was just an aura around him. You hear people talk about it all the time. There was an aura around him, and I think that's what we might be seeing happen with Trey Lance now that he is the guy and he doesn't have the veteran ahead of him. He can be himself, and I think it's going to be something to watch for. Is as much as what we know of him on the field, can he just be himself off of it?
Yes. Not to reference a movie that, is now questionable, but the line from Gone with the Wind very much represented Trey's answer around, like, this idea of what people think of him. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, in a very polite but very self-assured way, where he was like, hey, I mean this as respectfully as possible, but I don't care what you think. It's not my job to care what you think. I care what people in the locker room think. I care what my coaches think. I care how I feel about it. I agree. Seeing him make that transition from quiet guy who sort of accepted the role of, I'm the backup quarterback, I'm not going to draw the spotlight to me, I'm going to defer to the guy who's currently starting for the San Francisco 49ers. He shelved that persona, and this is leader Trey Lance. This is, I'm the quarterback Trey Lance.
Absolutely. And you're right. I think as far as, him saying that, as far as, in the most polite way possible, I don't care. That was a really well put phrase from Lance. But I think even the team itself, they know what's going on around him. And I think that in some ways, there's maybe a little bit of a rally around Trey Lance now that you also saw around Jimmy Garoppolo before, because it's like, hey, we're going to go out there and help this guy prove that this guy is the guy. We'll see how it all plays out, but I think that's maybe the direction that we're seeing this whole thing go with Trey Lance.
Okay, I got a few more here for you, Jack.
Okay, let's go.
Undrafted free agents that I'm interested in, because I think that this is an angle for a lot of these practices. The 53-man roster, in my humble opinion, is freaking stacked for the Niners. This is a deep team, and it's going to be really challenging to make those last, 5, 6, 7 cuts at the end of this roster. And there will be teams just waiting with bated breath, hoping the Niners cut someone at the position group that they need someone at, so that they can swoop them up before they revert to the 49ers practice squad. And I think that there are a couple of guys that fit that bill. Tay Martin is one that, admittedly, I did not have my heart set, my eyes set on. But with Larry Krueger coming out and specifically mentioning him, I have been keyed in on that. So does Tay Martin, the wide receiver out of Oklahoma State, do enough to start to climb above the rest of the logjam that I believe is happening for that, what I will anticipate to be the 6th wide receiver that makes the 53-man roster? I see the first 5 as locks: Debo, Brandon Ayuk, Jawan Jennings, Ray McLeod, and Danny Gray. Those 5, barring an injury, which would be extremely unfortunate, I feel those 5 make the roster. The Niners have oftentimes carried 6. Who might that 6th be? Another one I got my eye on, just from the athletic freak standpoint, Jason Poe, right? The idea that you've got a defensive tackle / fullback on the roster, someone that can play at these wildly different weights. Does he provide enough positional versatility and enough athleticism that the Niners are unwilling to risk him going through the waiver process? He seems like a clear-cut practice squad guy, given the uncertainty of where he would contribute. That always, to me, screams practice squad. But if you flash enough, you got to find a spot for him or risk losing him. The same is true for Jordan Mason, the running back out of Georgia Tech that you clued me in on, Jack. I want to know if it is this year's Elijah Mitchell. And until we see them with pads on, I understand that that'll be real challenging. But you were able to correctly suss out Elijah Mitchell as being the guy to keep our eyes on during this time last year. Will it be another case with Jordan Mason?
Yeah, Mason's an interesting one because he's looked really good so far. I think he's probably going to look good again this week. We'll see with everybody out there. As you pointed out, it's going to the pads coming on will change those things because I think the pads coming on is what's going to help. Terry Davis Price step up. That's right. Since we're talking about running backs, I know you're talking about undrafted free agents. I want to see Terry and Davis Price. I want to see him do something because I haven't seen him do anything yet. He didn't look good during rookie minicamp because they were throwing the ball around and he dropped a pass, and one pass he caught, he tripped over himself when he turned upfield. We didn't see him last week, and I just really haven't seen anything out of him yet at all. So I want to see something from Terry and Davis Price in this practice. Other than that, I think when you look at the undrafted free agents, I was a little bit hard on the safety out of Texas A&M last week after the OTA practice, in which he got burned by an assistant coach and knocked down by the running back JaMychal Hasty.
Right.
But, that's whatever. I think we'll see what he does. I mean, I think he's a guy who I know a lot of people were very interested in, and folks like myself had him getting taken by the Friars in the 6th round. So is he going to be able to step up and become a player for them? They can even push anybody in that safety room. I think it's going to be really hard for any of these, just kind of throwing this out there. I think it's going to be really hard for any of the undrafted free agents this season to make the roster like what we've seen in years past, just because the team is so deep, as we've talked about. I don't know how many spots there are for those guys to actually make the roster.
That makes a ton of sense. And one of the things to keep an eye on for me, just going back to the offensive line group and talking about rookies, is how many of these young players start to climb the ranks to where, it's not clear that they're stars or anything like that. But knowing how Coach Shanahan is about wanting rookies to really grab a position, to really earn a position before they're gifted something. We've seen it historically everywhere except for undrafted running backs, at which point Shanahan's like, yeah, you're fine. Go in there. You can start. But everyone else, they really have to earn it. So, those offensive linemen that we're talking about, Burford, does he start to climb in the ranks? Same thing for any of these undrafted free agents. Like, it'll be movement from 3rd string to 2nd string, but that feels important in some of these positional battles, in some of these depth chart battles when we're trying to suss out who's going to make the 53-man roster. And then I'll just say that, we touched on the running back room. The last thing I had out there for people for things that I want to get more information about, areas where I'll be looking for improvement, it's signs of Sermon, like any type of life coming from Trey Sermon. Is he going to earn himself a position on this 53-man roster, or is he simply going to be given one because he was a 3rd-round draft pick last year and it's too early to give up on an asset like that? I haven't heard anything as of yet that's going to sway me one way or the other. I'm penciling him in that running back room. I would like to see some evidence of him earning that spot.
Yeah, I hear you. That's a really good point. Is Sermon, if a guy like Jordan Mason's going to make the roster, it might be at the expense of somebody like a Trey Sermon, right? We don't know where the 49ers really are on Trey Sermon. It seemed like last year during training camp, he was running with the first unit.
Right.
And then he was gone, really for the most part throughout the season. And he didn't really get the ball very much the first week of OTAs. Last week, they gave it to him right away. The first time he carried it, the ball got knocked out of his hands. So, and they're not even tackling. The ball just got whacked out. And so, he's got to be able to make some kind of a positive impression. Maybe he has, because, we've only seen 2 of the 6 practices to this point. But
right.
We'll see. That's a really good one to keep an eye on, because Trey Sermon is a guy who they used a high pick on to trade up with for him last year. And I think they're hoping that they get something out of him.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm curious, like, as you go into this, what's top of your list? Like, what are some of the things that you already had as Jack's goals for mandatory minicamp of things that you were looking to keep an eye on?
Well, the first one for me is I haven't really paid attention to the defensive line yet. I
That's
haven't
right.
really gotten over there. Last week, I was going to do it last week, but then uh, Drake Jackson wasn't on the field, so I decided to focus on the defensive backs because the DBs were all there. So I decided to focus on that group instead. But I really want to watch and see Drake Jackson. I want to see how that defensive line looks. You're not going to get the full picture from them because they can't tackle at this point.
Right.
But you can still get some ideas as to the pass rush and who's kind of stepping up and those types of things. So
especially with a guy like Drake Jackson, where his first step is one of the things to keep an eye on, right? Speed will still translate in these practices. It's just not the physicality.
right, you're not going to see because they can't bring him down, but you can see the speed, you can see the get off, and you'll be able to see those types of things. So definitely want to keep an eye on the defensive line. I think that'll be one of my focuses tomorrow. Will be, start off with the quarterbacks because everybody wants to see the quarterbacks, and then I'll mosey over to the defensive line a little bit and see what that looks like tomorrow. And then the following day, I'll do some running backs, and I think I'll have gotten through and the receivers on the last day. And I think by that point, I've gotten through all the position groups prior to the start of training camp. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, what's your interpretation in these practices, last week with the organized team activities and very similar rules in place around the physicality of these practices, NFLPA, obviously agreeing to these terms wherein there's no live hitting going on at this point in the offseason. How hard are the players practicing at this point? Like, do you have a rough guess of percentage of how fast they're running, how hard they're going in these drills?
I don't think that you can go into a football practice and not go full speed.
Yeah.
Especially at this level, which is why I think you see the guys who are there but not participating. I think that's wise because they realize that if they're on the field, they have to give it everything they have. They can't just go out there and half-ass it during these drills because that's when you get injured.
Right.
Right. And so if you're going to step on the field, you need to be able to go full speed. And so I think the guys that are out there, that's what they're doing. They're going as fast as they can, as hard as they can to make plays. There's only so many opportunities you get to impress the coaches. And you can do a little bit of that in individual time, but you need to be able to show the ball skills and those types of things during 7-on-7 or team action. So I think when they're actually on the field, they're going as hard as they can to make a play or put themselves in position to show up good on film.
Given that observation and the idea that there is no live tackling, no live hitting going on, do you find it easier to judge the skill positions at this point in the offseason?
Yeah, it's easier to see that because the quarterback's always throwing the ball, right? They're never
right.
So you're able to kind of see that part of it a little bit better. You can kind of see who would have got a sack and things like that, but the skill possessions are definitely easier to get a read on. And
that makes sense.
That's always the case, quite frankly. It's always easier to get a sense of all those positions when you're live, unless you're really focused in on the offensive line. But when you're watching team period right now, it can be kind of difficult to see who is holding their own out of the 5 offensive linemen on any given running play or passing play, unless you're really focusing on one position.
That makes sense. And then as we get into the padded practices, it becomes a little bit easier to suss out who's manhandling who.
Yeah, and even then, it's still that's one of the things when we talk about practice. At least myself, I'll admit to this. There's things that I'm sure that I'm missing at times because there's only so much you can see at any given time.
Right.
And it's if I had the ability to go back in and look at the all 22, my observations might be completely different after watching that because I'll be able to see, maybe some things along the offensive line that just don't look right, or this guy was out of position a little bit here or there. Why was this a bust in coverage? And those kinds of things that you just can't see watching practice because we're at the field level.
Yeah, and it's real time.
Yeah, it's real time. There's no board for us to watch a replay of what happened or like there is during the game. So it makes it a little bit more challenging.
Yes, it does. Thank goodness we have a lot of sets of eyes out there reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, usually sometimes I'm standing next to Grant and we'll share, what we saw to see if, who was the guy that hit the, who did this? What do you think about this play? What do you think about that play? So sometimes we're able to do that as well, which is helpful.
That is helpful. That's good. I like to hear of everyone coming together and sharing resources like that. Feels good.
Well, yeah, sometimes I'll just go stand in the corner by myself because I don't want anybody to see my notes, right?
There you go. The answers to the test.
I'm kidding on that, but like for me, just to be, for me, I see the game much better when I'm standing behind the offense than I do when I'm on the defensive side. I can see the way that everything's developing better, and so that's kind of the where I try to position myself as behind the offense so that I can see things. Like last week at OT, I was in the secondary. I wasn't able to see the offensive line as well from where I was standing. I could see more of what like you were saying, the specialists and what they were doing, because just from where I was, my vantage point wasn't all that great with the offensive lineman, other than when I zeroed in, like for example, when Spencer Burford and Eric Armstead went one-on-one, I was able to kind of really watch that battle and see how that played out.
Nice. And do you think that preferring to be viewing it from the vantage point of behind the offensive line, does that come from your years of playing the quarterback position, that's how you're used to viewing the offense?
I think so. Probably comes because I'm more comfortable seeing everything from that perspective, because it also helps, makes it easier for me because from, like you said, my background, but then also you can see that even on some of the running stuff, you can see it better from, I just tend to see it better from that point than from in front.
It makes sense. As it's developing, a lot of that movement can only be seen from that vantage.
Yeah. And because I'm typically I'm looking at things from an offensive point of view and not as much on the defensive side, and that's even what our notes are, right? At least if you look at my notes, it's usually, 5 to 84, right? And this is the route, and this is who is in coverage and things like that. And if there was something else that jumped out, I'll make a note of it. But it's usually very offensive position centric with the notes even. So I've got to really be cognizant of that to make sure I'm keeping an eye on it for the defensive side.
Well, hey, if they're all offensive sided this time around, I'm guessing with the offensive line issues and people wanting to know about Trey Lance, you'll be just fine there, Jack.
That's right. Well, everybody likes these reports, it seems like, because this is the time of the year where there's very few people are able to be there, and so I put my notes down. I'll go back through and read the comments over there, and if you guys have something specific that you want me to keep an eye on for you, and hit me up on Twitter. My handle's right there at @JackHam_NFL. Let me know what you're looking for tomorrow, and I'll keep an eye on it and try to add it up into the practice report for you.
It is a limited number of eyes that are out there, and of those eyes that are out there, you are my favorite to get the practice reports from. So I don't think I'm alone there. I think a lot of people are anxious to hear your reports coming out of tomorrow's practice. Yeah,
no, thank you. I look forward to it. I know you were in there on Wednesday, and that was exciting to see. Actually, it's good to see everybody in there when I'm doing it. The more people that are there, the more fun it gets, and you guys usually ask really good questions. So I appreciate it. And real quick, before we move on, Aaron jumps in, says, "What's up, my dudes? So apparently this is where the cool kids play. I feel left out." See, that's what happens, Aaron. You go back to work, and now you miss the shows. And no, I'm kidding. We're going to have to do some roundtables together. That was a lot of fun last year when we did that roundtable.
Most definitely it was.
Game. So keep an eye on that for everybody out there. That and training camp and everything else that's going on. So real quick, Rob, what are some of the things that you have going on your channel?
I will be back on tomorrow. No show tonight, but we'll be back on tomorrow with the mailbag. Going to be doing the minicamp mailbag. So I'll send out the tweet in the morning, get those previously submitted questions that get the more robust answers. And then at 5 p.m. on my channel, I go live and I welcome everyone to be a part of the dialogue and fire off those questions right there in the chat. I'll give you my off-the-cuff responses, which are even more wrong than my well-thought-out question responses are. So it's comedy gold is what it is, Jack.
There you go. I know what you're saying. I've been putting out those pointers according to Jackal for the last couple months. Those things are getting harder and harder as they go along. Can't wait for the season to get here. That'll give me some new material. But make sure if you're watching this real quick, make sure you get over to Rob's channel. He's got a great channel. You guys know this already. That's why I have so many people in the watching this right now, because you guys are watching Rob and like his take so much and like to hear his voice. So make sure you get over there, like his channel. Make sure you're subscribing to his stuff. And while you're here, before you head out today, hit that like button for me. Hit the subscribe button if you're watching this, you like what you're seeing, you're not already subscribed to the channel. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this real quick. Rob, if you just give me a second. I did set up the membership option on the channel. So you got Rob, he's got the sneakerheads over here. we got the toolbox, so you can jump into the toolbox and you can be. There's 3 different levels, and I'm working on some shirts and things like that for folks that jump into the top level. So keep an eye on that stuff on social media. Hopefully we'll get a design up here pretty soon and share it with y'all. So like, subscribe, and let's have fun.
I can't wait to see that shirt, Jack. I will proudly don one on this channel once it comes out. So you let me know when those are available.
There you go. I gotta get Swan to finish that off so I can get those sent to the printers then.
Nice.
Thanks so much for everybody to join. Like I said, like, subscribe, and hit that little bell notification so you know when we go live. I'll be back tomorrow with the camp reports. It's going to be my next 3 days. So definitely be doing all that, and check that out real quick while we're on. I just mentioned it, and we've already got our first new member, Bryant, as the first member of the channel. So thank you very much, Bryant. And
cheers to Bryant, man. That one's for you.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining today. We'll be back tomorrow with the camp report. I'll probably be on with Surreal Sunil as well. So take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your Monday. We'll talk soon.